With that, it's 9 o'clock, and let's go ahead and get started. Many people will continue to be joining us. I didn't even look to see, we have 23 so far, so we'll go to 150, so that'll be fine. Welcome to the Q2 meeting, all-member meeting of the National Society of IT Service Providers. Just a few notes. We truly strive to be the voice of the industry, defining the standards for professionalism in IT. This meeting is open to the public and anyone may join. This meeting is being recorded and will be posted. If you do not wish to be on the video, turn off your camera. If you do not wish to be on the audio recording, please turn off your microphone. The chat will also be posted. So our team does a spectacular job of turning this meeting into a recording that is an actual strong, powerful resource for you. And we've had people, a fair number of people, watch the recordings and download them and so forth. So just know that you are participating. Our recorded meetings are posted on our YouTube channel, and you should absolutely join our channel. We need more members in general, but we need more people connected to us on YouTube. It helps the algorithm. But it's also going to be on our website with the full transcription and closed captions. So you can always find that at nsitsp.org/meetings. And our YouTube is youtube.com/NSITSP. So today we're going to have some notes from the board and from the committees, and we have had a crazy busy quarter. So it's sometimes not always visible how busy we are. And I will leave it up to Amy, whether you want to jump in right at the beginning or whether you want to let Andy skip ahead of you.
I think I'll go ahead and do my introduction and then we could do Andy. So go ahead and jump to the next slide there, Carl. So we had, like Carl said, a really super busy quarter. And what happens is with organizations is there's things going on and people are working on stuff, and then suddenly a bunch of things get finished and we can and we can actually announce them. So on the board side, we authorized the creation of a communication task force this quarter. The job of this task force is going to be to come up with templated documents and sound bites for rapid response to cyber privacy and legislative situations. The goal is for you to be able to use those to respond to media requests for quotes. This task force is also going to work to make sure that the overall messaging of the organization is consistent in language and appearance. We have not populated that task force yet, so that will be on our coming to-do list as well. So be sure to look for that. We've had a couple of volunteers already, so but we will want to, a full set of 6-8 people. We also voted to support as a general concept the right to repair. While we recognize that the complexity of today's technology, we also understand that consumers expect the ability to make basic repairs to a device. Things like hard drive replacement, memory enhancement, screen repair, that kind of stuff, that all comes to mind. We also recognize that our industry contains professionals with many different areas of focus, and device repair is one of them. But importantly, we did not endorse any specific piece of legislation, just the concept of itself in general, that our organization is in favor of the right to repair. Now, following on the announcement from Carl that he wishes to exit the position of executive director by end of year, and of course still be actively involved in the organization, we did authorize the creation of an executive search task force. We took applications for it and we populated that with people. And you'll hear what that task force has been up to later in this meeting from the chair of that group, Chris Barber. And speaking of Chris, we have had 2 meetings with CISA, the Federal Cyber Information Security Agency. Chris pursued this relationship with CISA and following these 2 meetings with different agencies within the department, we will begin to have appointments to various CISA committees upcoming and a continuing relationship allowing us to participate in developing more appropriate messaging to MSPs as security generalists and to small businesses coming from CISA. That's our goal, is really to help them get their messaging better so that it means more to the MSPs and it means more to the small businesses of the world that we all work with. Next slide, please, Carl. We've been attending a lot of events lately. I wanted to acknowledge our friends at SMB Tech Fest and Channel Pro for including us in every event they offer. It's very generous of them to do that. We appreciate that they offer us space where we can talk to attendees about joining our organization. Some of our members are at Channel Pro today, even in Chicago. We were also able to attend the Channel Partners Conference and participate in the ChannelWise Coaching Cafe, thanks to Catherine Rose. Myself, Carl, and Jeff Ponce offered free business and career coaching as part of her event, which was really successful. We've also been at other events, and we appreciate the volunteers that staff our tables and have been out there representing us. We're wearing out a few of our volunteers, so if you're willing, please speak up and we will put you on the list. We have, I think it's 3 or 4 table setups and signage circulating around. So if you're going to an event, please ask them if we can set up a table. We need to be out there talking to people about the organization and generating new members. We also introduced member webinars this quarter. Some of these will be for public consumption, others only for members. So far, we had a report from the trenches as Andy Higgins told us about his client that had MFA cloned, how he was able to identify that and resolve the issue. We also had a cyber insurance deep dive where I interviewed one of our vendor members, Brian Mahone, about what we need to know to interact with cyber insurance as IT professionals. And later in this meeting, Carl is going to tell you about some other upcoming webinars that we have scheduled. I also then wanted to highlight just our committees and just applaud them for doing an amazing job. You're going to hear a report from each of them, so I'm not going to repeat that here. But as you see on this slide, there's been a lot going on from each of those committees, and we're gonna hear in detail from all of them. And what I really wanted to do today, next slide, please, Carl, was to take a final moment to spotlight our social media sources. And we will get links to all of those into the chat window so that you can copy them down. We have forums on our website. That is a social media thing. We'd like to get member meetups going at these industry events that we've all been attending, but we need to know where you're going. And that's a place, there's a place for that in the forum. So please start to visit that regularly and participate in those forums. And then did you know we have a blog? Carl's been publishing to the blog. I recently started to publish and help Carl. The blog content helps our members learn what's going on inside the organization day by day instead of all at once at a quarterly meeting like this. And we have the usual social media locations too. So you can help us by commenting on our posts. Don't just hit that like button. The algorithms that bump things up really are increased when you share the content and when you comment on the content. So if you could do that, it'll really help us to get exposure to people that haven't yet heard of us and let them know what we're doing. I recently heard some kind of strange assumptions about what it is that the organization is about. So, getting our social media out there, our blog posts and sharing those and getting them out to the world will really, really help define us. Finally, I'm going to highlight a blog post. You can flip slides, Carl, and a significant accolade. Canalys, a large data analysis firm, came out with a new study that found us in the top 67 most valuable associations cited by the IT service providers they interviewed, distributors and vendors in our industry. This was a global study. It really is confirmation that although we're still very small, we're having an impact, and it's thanks to all of our volunteers and those of you that understand the vision and contributed to this organization. So I wanted to thank you for elevating our organization to this level. Next, we're going to let Carl take over the show with his executive report, and we may need to squeeze in Andy Higgins with his committee report somewhere in here too, because he has to leave us early today.
Yeah, let me go ahead and have Andy go. I don't have a slide for you because you're out of order. That's not my fault. So
I like being out of order.
yeah, I know you do. So go ahead.
All right, thank you, Carl, and apologies for breaking up the order, but I've got a flight to catch. Yes, I'm going to quickly report on the NSITSP Marketing Committee. Our number one priority has been to get more members into the organization. And to do that, we need more members from who are already in the organization to help us out. I think our committee is still relatively small, so we really need people to come and join us and just do just a little bit of this, that, and the other, and we can spread the load out and get more and more people joining. Okay, so we need to provide content. Our three main points is we need to provide content to help members do a better job, more marketing. You know, these webinars that we've been doing, Amy mentioned some of them. This is, we put a call out to anybody who wants to do a webinar. If you've had a breach like I had, one of my clients did, not my fault. Sorry, don't want to go down that rabbit hole. But if anybody has, other things, preferably vendor neutral. We try and stay as vendor neutral, but information, get it out to our members and have people, help out that way. The committee will also be providing a list of local media contacts, so members can contact their local media. That's going to appear on the website shortly. We need to better communicate with members, of course, so we're always looking for tools and ways to communicate with membership. For some reason, email doesn't seem to be grabbing people. I wonder why. But we find LinkedIn, the presence in LinkedIn is growing, and what we'd like to do is get members on our committee to push, LinkedIn joins and things and likes and comments, as Amy said. That seems to be one of the better ways of getting it going and getting on more podcasts as well. Trade shows, we've had a bunch of people go to trade shows, as Amy has mentioned. We want to help communicate with all our members to, if you go to a trade show, just let us know, let Carl know, let whoever know. We'll send you a bunch of cards and you can just drop them on a bunch of tables. That's what I do. If we don't actually have a presence there, just drop a bunch of cards around the place and people pick up, spread the word. So we think it's all great value for our membership, but as I say, we're always open for new ideas. And we'd really like to call on all members to help with the committee. We've got a lot to do and only a few committee members who are all running businesses at the same time, just like all of y'all. Excuse the Texasism there. So the more help we have, the better it will be. So just contact me if you'd just like to do a little bit of work on the marketing member committee, and we will appreciate every little thing that you can do. With that, I'm going to go catch my plane. All right. So thank you, Carl.
All right.
Bye.
Fly well. So the marketing committee really, all the committees have done a spectacular job, and the marketing committee has sort of stepped up and started actually putting out a lot of stuff. A lot of you may not be aware because you go to our website, you log in and you look for what you look for. If you just scroll down our front page on the website, you'll see we have an amazing amount of stuff there. And if you scroll all the way to the bottom, you'll see our social media kit, which includes graphics you can use and all of our links so you can join us on all the social media. So, use our website as a resource. That's what it's intended to be. So let me give you my report super quick. We currently have about 260 members. And, it's growing slowly. It's funny. We will get more members. We'll get 15 members in the next week because of people responding to this and all of your social media around this meeting. And then we'll get 10 members next month, and we'll get 5 members the month after that, right? That's sort of our norm. It's like a heartbeat, And so I just want you to know, please join us. If you are here and you're a free member, we want to know, what is keeping you from investing $150 in your career, your industry, and your profession? We do have a number of vendor sponsors. We're going to have a slide for them. We're extremely grateful to them, but we also need more vendor sponsors. And we need vendors who understand that they need us, that we're not just a thing that's out there, that we are part of helping to build a strong profession so that their vendor partners, the people that they use to resell into this community, run strong professional businesses. I think there's going to be a comeuppance in this industry in the next 5 years, as a lot of the stuff that we have addressed specifically with regard to ransomware and our own reputation, a lot of stuff is going to come to a head. And, we literally exist to help drive that conversation and to represent this industry. And so, it's sort of like you want to be on the right side when the stuff hits the fan. And that includes having a code of ethics posted on your website. And that's why we produce the code of ethics, right? Our finances are good. They're not spectacular. We could use an extra 10 or $20 million, but we're doing well. We are paying our bills. We're keeping our head above water, and things are all moving in the right direction. We do have a number of people who have gone ahead and converted their old membership, the $100 flat fee, to the new membership where it's $125 for an individual member or $150 for a small company, and then it goes up from there depending on the size of your company. So our finances are in good shape. I would like them to be in great shape. But like I said, we're paying our bills and we're doing well. If you're interested in any of the details on this, you're welcome to attend the Finance Committee meetings, as well as any other committee meetings that we have. So if you have any specific questions for me at the end, let me know. But I assure you, we are doing well and we're heading in the right direction. Side note, we have this executive search committee, and every single time we talk to anybody from an association management company, early on, they make the comment, holy smokes, you guys are not yet 2 years old, and you have, between paid and unpaid members, over 800 people, and you've got 2,000 on your mailing list. This is unheard of in the growth of membership associations. So, it seems small when you look at a specific number, but in the big picture, we are doing all the right things, and we need you to help us promote that. And I know you're not all social media mavens, but when you get a chance, as Amy said, click like, make a comment, and share it on your social media, and that spreads it all out. That's the whole point of that viral marketing. All right, quick poll, and I got to find the polls here. Why, in your words, why did you decide to become a paid member? Take just a minute, everybody, and just find the poll and put in the answer for that. I would appreciate it. A huge shout out to our vendor sponsors. These folks have put in more than $150. They put in $2,500 or $10,000 each, and we really appreciate them. If you have vendor sponsors that you believe should be involved in our industry, please ask them to get in touch with me or to get in touch with anybody on the board, Amy or anybody, and we'll be happy to start a conversation. Again, I think it's the smaller vendors who realize that they absolutely need us in order to be successful in this industry. Many people come to me for my business and they say, oh, how can you introduce me to MSPs? And I always tell them, get involved. You don't just buy a Google ad. That's fine, but then you're just another icon on the internet. So, all right, keep answering that question. Why did you join? Huge promo. And I don't know if Steve Kazan is on here or not. If you are, open your microphone and begin speaking to us. Steve from the marketing committee got in touch with Peggy Galvin and said, hey, can you help us out? So Peggy does press relations training for large corporations. And when we started talking about this, one of our big questions was, well, will this work for small corporations? And she said, oh, yes, we have a specific slide deck for small organizations, for small companies. And, this is, how do you talk to the media? How do you know that you're talking to the right person? Imagine, if you will, that during this meeting, there's an attack, a major attack on some company somewhere. It doesn't have to be in our industry. Any company anywhere that's big enough to disrupt and be on the news. It would be great if members of this organization could make themselves available to the media to give that little sound bite. But most of people say, well, I don't know anything about the media. I don't know about the news. I don't know the difference between a newspaper reporter and the local TV station, a local radio station. I don't know what they want. Well, this is where you get that information. And I am very impressed with the fact that I don't think I've ever seen this training anywhere in the IT industry for SMB IT consultants in my life. I literally know people who do this training for the likes of Salesforce and GoPro and other large organizations, but I've never seen it for SMB IT. This is a members only event. So if you are a registered free guest of NSITSP, thank you for your support. The cost of this training is probably $30,000 or $40,000 if you were a big corporation, but you can get it by joining our organization, and it is free to all paid members of NSITSP. So join us at the end of the month, May 24th, and this obviously it'll be recorded. It will be presented only to members of our organization after it is recorded. It will become a resource that we can rely on, and it may be the beginning of a longer term series of trainings on media relations. So does anybody have any questions about this before we move on? All right, very good. So let me end the poll and share the results. So why did you join? Well, I don't know if it's useful to show all the details. There we go. I guess we'll have to write a blog post on all of the answers here. Legislation, how it drives professionalism. We saw the value of the organization is trying to do. Very good. So I appreciate that feedback. Part of why we want to do this is, to be very honest, we want to make sure that we're sending the right messages to people when we do our marketing and say, okay, people tell us that this is why they join. So I appreciate that feedback. Now I got to figure out how to get back to the slideshow. There we go. All right. We have an upcoming webinar at the end of June, and I know that's more than a month away, but the registration is available if you go to nsitsp.org/events. All of our upcoming meetings, including our committees, are there. Larry, would you, if you don't mind, open your microphone and give us a couple minutes on what is change management and why we should attend this spectacular webinar?
I would be absolutely thrilled, Carl. Thank you. I want to start by saying that I learned about change management 30 or 40 years ago. And like all new things, you never really know when you learn something new how long it's been around. I was shocked to find how long change management had been around when I first learned about it. And I'm also surprised today how many people don't understand what change management really is. So if you don't, or if you think you understand, that's great, but I think it's really important that you understand what the industry, the change management industry really understands change management to be. Change management it's called an enabling framework for managing the people side of change. An enabling framework, something that allows you to manage the people side of change. We all know how many people dislike change. You ask a group of people and 80–90% of them will say, no, I don't like change. Figuring out how to make change happen is very, very important. And it's critical to understand it for a very simple reason. Business yearns for stasis, stability, uniformity. business recoils from change. Business as an organization, it likes systems, it likes structure, it likes stability, it likes dependability, it likes predictability. In today's world, the world that businesses live in, we are in a crazy, high-paced, fast-paced change that brings friction and turbulence and chaos. The world is changing around us faster than we can keep up with it. Those two dynamics, the desire for stasis or dependability and the world changing, creates friction. Until business leaders learn how to create a culture that can embrace and implement change, they're going to continue to fight a losing battle against change and waste thousands of hours and millions of dollars fighting the environment they exist in. This webinar will give you very powerful insights as to how you can begin to change the culture of your organization and your clients to better accept and adapt to change. That's what this is all about.
Unmute myself. Excellent. Thank you very much. And of course, we'll call on you for a blog post promoting this between now and then.
Of course.
Very good. Thank you. A few more announcements. Mark your calendars. Believe it or not, August 9th is our next meeting. And I say, believe it or not, because the next thing that's going to happen is in August, we're going to begin our election season again. So our quarterly meeting is always the second Wednesday of the second month of the quarter. So join us for that. Join us on social media. The elections, we had our first elections last year, which was a huge milestone. And the way it worked was that we divided up for our first election, and about 4 people per committee were elected to 2-year terms and the rest to 1-year terms. So anyone who is standing for election this year will be standing for a full 2-year term. And that way we've got staggered roughly, half of the people who serve are elected each year. If anyone has been appointed to a committee since the elections, they will also stand for a full term. So basically, we're going to start the promotion in July. And I know that seems like a long ways off because it's the beginning of May. But before our next quarterly meeting, we will have already requested that people begin filing for office. Filing takes place during the month of August, and then campaigning in the first couple of weeks of September, and voting will be this 8-day period in September. And of course, the results will be posted to our site. If you're interested in the results of the last election, they are on our blog. And as Amy mentioned, our blog has become fairly busy. Originally it was /news. So if you go to NSITSP.org/news or /blog, they take you to the same spot because it's really where we post up what's new and what's going on. We also, are at a lot of events literally during this call, right? As this call was beginning, I got a note from somebody who said, hey, I'm at Channel Pro in Chicago, and there's a bunch of people here from the NSITSP. They've got a table and they're greeting people. And so, look for us at these events. And if you choose to, join us, you can actually sit behind a table and shake people's hands and ask them to join. We have lots of volunteers. Nye on my staff sort of pulls her hair out organizing this because we have a never-ending list of events that we need to go to, and we need to find members for all of them. One of the big events that's coming up is the MSP Rescue. Harry Brailsford's putting on an event in Princeton, New Jersey in July, and he has given us an entire room to hold an in-person NSITSP meeting. So if you want to volunteer for that, send an email to admin@nsitsp.org, and we will be very happy to have you help organize that. It's not difficult. Basically, you're going to stand in front of the room and say, hi, welcome to the NSITSP. and we'll organize it all, and we will do everything we can to make you as successful as possible with that. With that, I enjoy always introducing Heather, who started with us in the US, and then she said, "No, I'm tired of you guys. I have to be farther away from you, but I still love you." So she's joining us from the Netherlands to introduce the committee reports.
Yes, thank you, Carl. I love being a part of this organization and love being able to introduce our committees. For those of you who have been attending all these quarterly meetings from the beginning, isn't it exciting to see all that we've done? I mean, we've always had exciting meetings, but we were trying to figure out, how were we going to be formed? What were we going to do? Now I have a notepad filled of dates that I need to go to webinars and events and Channel Pro and this and that and blogs to read and things I've missed. And I feel like I read NSITSP things every day now. There's so much that's happening and it's so exciting for 2 years. So it's not just that we've gotten a bunch of members. There's so much that we have to offer to our members. So if you aren't a paid member, certainly become one. One of the things that is great about being a member is that you get the opportunity to be on a committee. And I call it an opportunity because you are part of that change that's happening. We're not a lot of people, but we're swimming in the same direction and we're making big things happen. And you can be a part of that even more by joining a committee. You look at the names of the committees and it's legislative, finance, marketing, government, and governance, and you might think, I don't know anything about those. So I'll wait until there's an IT committee and then I'll join that. But we don't have one of those. We have these committees and you can do them. You can all do them. You market yourself every day. I know you look at your finances. Legislative, it's about passion. It's about, getting out there and making sure that the legislators are listening to us. It's selling to the government essentially. And governance is how we're created. We need your opinions on these things. And so getting involved, that's coming up quick, July. So start thinking about it because, being involved in this and watching it grow and watching it happen, you're not just sitting on the sideline, you're in it, you're making it happen too. So join in that as well. But I'm going to announce first Dennis Wilson. He is the chair of the legislative committee, and he's going to tell us what his committee is doing.
Thank you, Heather. I appreciate the opportunity to come and talk about what the legislative committee is doing. I'm extremely proud of all the work that we've been able to put together over the last year and a half or so. We have now a full slate of 7 active members, along with about 5 regularly attending guest members. And so we've got a full house and plenty of people that are bringing their ideas and bringing their ability to do some work. Currently, what we've got done or are in process with is first the Know Your Legislator Handbook is finally up on the website. It is about a 15-page simple guideline to how you go about talking to a legislator, what a legislator does, how the legislation is typically organized, and that kind of thing. So if you're interested in working with the legislative process, this is a great place to start with, and it's at resources if you are a member. So that's a great place to start. Second, we had this month a proposed legislative change in the state of California. There was the right to repair, which we talked about a little bit, SB 244. And as you heard, we currently have a position as a organization of supporting the right to repair. This will continue to show up at various state levels, and so it's going to be of interest to the committee to watch where and how this shows up. The third one is a new reference for members, the state resources brochure, so that you can understand where your state resources might be, what the URLs are, and a legislative discussion or legislature discussion battle card that we're in the process of completing. Should have that for you shortly. In process, we have the legislative recommendation and model that we're working on, an IT appreciation month that we're working on for a national appreciation month for IT. This is a great way to get us in front of a ton of people and do it for not a lot of money. Next, we had a study we're doing on the national cybersecurity strategy, and Ted is going to talk about that more when we have our next meeting. But the next we are in process with the YouTube Shorts, answering a single question with each. We've got about 2 of those done now currently, and we hope to each month do another one or so that will show up as a reference in the YouTube, our YouTube meeting. So that is that. Yeah.
That's all you're doing? What the hell?
Yeah, hardly anything at all. Currently, we are meeting every other Tuesday at 1 p.m. in the afternoon Pacific time. And if you're interested in coming, go to the website, to the meetings section, and that'll not only give you our calendar, but it gives you the Zoom access. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dennis. That is a very impressive list of accomplishments for a quarter. Wow, that's awesome. Next, we have Tracy Harden, who is the chair of the Finance Committee.
Thanks, Heather. Gosh, it's really hard to follow up after Dennis. We don't quite have that list going because this is a slower time of year for us. We tend to get busier in the second part of the year working on budget stuff. However, what we are working on is a way for people to contribute more to the program. So one of the things everybody's been saying is they want us funded by members and not by vendors. Nobody wants a big vendor coming in and taking control of our group with a giant donation. So in order to do that, we need our members to contribute more money, and we ourselves, our group is made up of mostly IT service provider owners and a few vendors. And several of us have given additional money to the program, but we were like, hey, let's come up with something more formal and offer it to everybody. But not only that, when people do donate extra money, can we have a way of saying thank you and show appreciation for those kind of things? So that's the kind of stuff we're working on right now. One of our members also mentioned, she says, I wish you had something that was more like a monthly contribution versus a one-time. That fits me better. So we're working on these ideas to present to the board in different ways that members can donate additional funds and get appreciation shown to them for these contributions, and to move us more forward to being a true member-driven society versus having to rely on vendors for money. So that is what we're working on right now, Heather.
That's wonderful.
I put a note in the chat to the donate section. We haven't figured out the second piece, the NPR type, where what recognition you get for your donations. But I assure you, we will recognize you if you help us out.
Yes, we will.
And if you want to give us $1 million a month, we will take it.
Yeah.
I did have a stupid question because I'm stupid. When we do for like ARCA, as we fight a certain position, we collect money towards that cause. An example, Carl, you're old like me and lived in California. when Proposition 13, remember Travis, every time sign the petition, donate money. Is that within our charter? Is that something we could look at as we fight specific issues in specific jurisdictions?
We can absolutely do that. We're not there yet, in part because there's a certain level of bookkeeping, because when you collect money specifically, we can lobby because we're a C6, but to collect that money, we got to keep track of it and we got to file some extra forms. And, there's a level of management that has to take place. That is in our future. That is not today, but it's a good point.
Okay, thank you.
Great. And we heard from Andy Higgins earlier. Just to remind you, he is looking for committee members, and you don't have to be a marketing professional. You might even pick up a few tips about marketing for your own MSP. So that could be a nice little side added bonus. So do consider joining his committee. And last, we had Lisa Marie Papp, who is the chair of the governance committee. Lisa, are you here?
She was. She might be muted. Oh, no. Oh, we may have lost her.
Oh,
So-
Muted.
She's muted. She's talking.
Oh,
Sorry about that.
oh,
Sorry
there we go.
about that. I just wanted to say thank you for this opportunity. And Heather, it was a great segue. Yes, we have the elections coming in, as you saw the slide that Carl presented, and we're going to follow that same format as for this year. And it gives you an opportunity, one, to stay at your committee that you're on, or venture and put your toe in another pond. Even if you are in a committee sitting a seat, does not mean you cannot attend another committee just to be a little nosy, as I have sometimes traveled into the legislation or the finance just to be a little bit nosy, because sometimes their ideas don't always get to us readily. And I go, well, maybe we can fish and try and help each other out. So this is a great opportunity to become more involved in knowing what we're trying to do. With that being said, another option as well as myself, I think I accidentally kicked it off by putting a sticker on my Yeti and was sitting down having coffee, and somebody recognized it and started asking me questions. So I put it on LinkedIn and it blew up from there. Thank you, Amy and Carl. So if you have a Yeti and you want to decorate it, everybody seems to be sticker happy, but it's a great conversation piece because you can kind of do it in stealth mode when you go to like ASCII and some other places that I have snuck into. But it's a great way to promote our organization and just start a conversation, because you just never know who you might pick up and grab their interest. So with that, we're also looking at getting started with what we call an ambassador type of badge, as well as a recruiter badge. And we're going to be developing out a brief description and everything, and that will also be put on the website. So, it's like you get these name tags and you're just going to add badges and stuff too, but it's going to be something that kind of stands out and kind of draws attention. The other item is, and I really was excited in hearing this the other day from Carl, because I like to be involved and sometimes I might get too involved, but hearing that CISA has asked and said, hey, we are interested in having some members or member from NSITSP that is in the SMB aspect to come over. That is a big ask, and that is a great organization. And I was personally really excited because I will say the reason I joined this organization was it's something I was looking for 11 years ago. And this is such a great way to give back. And I will tell you what I did when I started my business 11 years ago and what I do today, it is a complete 180. And cybersecurity, I spoke about 11 years ago, and it is dead on what we're doing today. So please, we're going to be putting out information. We're going to find out and have conversations with these other organizations that are seeking us out for help or support or getting some extra brain power. And with that, we will also be seeing what their needs are, what their requirements, and we'll be posting those as well. I appreciate it. And Heather, it's great to see you across the pond. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa Marie. That's great. And it's so exciting to have these programs where we can talk about NSITSP and really get the word out. So many people don't know what the NSITSP is, or what, if they've heard of us, don't know what we're doing. It's really important to have that as a conversation. And, you know, every conference has those lunches, and you start talking about legislation, and boy, that really starts the table talking. So it's a really great way to start having a conversation at a conference when you're meeting with other MSPs at various places. You know, get the word out, and you could get a recognition badge as well. So that's it for me. I'm going to turn it back to Carl and Amy. They have a question and answer and an open discussion session.
Thank you. And by the way, this is such a perfect example of how this organization is truly built from the bottom up, and your involvement matters. The recognition badges thing started with the finance committee saying, hey, we need these programs for people to give money. And the board said, okay, and then sent it off to the governance committee, like, what does that look like, right? The finance committee also started the whole program of, hey, we should be able to do some recruitment. You know, they're always focused on the money. Give us some more money. So we're like, all right, get people some stickers and some badges to take to conferences and so forth. So that whole marketing thing, we took it to the marketing committee, and they worked out the details. So, you know, the board sort of moves things back and forth, but it is the membership. It is you and your committees who are really pushing us forward. So please, 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 if you are only a guest, please become a full member. And like I said, you know, it's the cost of 1 hour of labor that I'm sure you can bill some client for. Chris, I hope that you are here and able to open your microphone and tell us about, Chris is the chair of the Executive Search Committee, as well as being the one who's been active with helping us get started, actually getting involved with CISA.
Chris is not actually here today, so he's asked me to
I apologize, folks. I am here,
awesome.
but I had something on my books from like 6 months ago that I'm driving to. So I had asked Amy to report out on my behalf. But I did want to weigh in on something real quick. Lisa Marie, who I've had the privilege of meeting in person. I totally love your sentiment about CISA, but there's a part of that story that you probably should know. They did not reach out to us. It was nonstop shenanigans. I've been trying to get on their radar since last July. And I started at the very top with Director Easterly in person. So it was quite a production getting on their radar. But as Carl and Amy and everybody else will tell you, we are very much on their radar. They are very excited to work with us. And we've got some really great things to look forward to with that partnership. And of course, we will keep you folks fully involved. If anybody I'm in Maryland. I'm 20 minutes south of Baltimore, 20 minutes west of DC. If anybody on this call is in my area, I plan on making personal in-face trips to CISA to make sure that things keep moving, and would love to carpool if anybody else wants to join me. But I'm going to get off of my soapbox. Amy, thank you for heading this up for me, and I'll shut up now and mute myself.
Your audio sounds amazing for being in the car, so appreciate you popping in. I will say, you know, Lisa also did mention the badges and whatnot. I was at Channel Partners this week, and you all should have it from your welcome kit, the little name tag enhancements, you know, the little ribbon you can stick at the bottom of your name tag. And I was wearing it, and a couple people, you know, as I was, you know, wandering the expo hall and stuff, they were like, hey, what did you get? You got an extra thing on your thing. I was like, oh yeah, this is the National Society, right? Just is that prompt to get me to talk to them. So definitely make use of those materials that you all now have. So as Chris mentioned, he did an amazing job of opening up the opportunity with CISA for us, and there's going to be a lot of opportunity there. So in addition to being appointed to our committees, our governance committee will be working on the process of figuring out who we appoint to the various committees that are opening up to us over at CISA. But the task force. So we have a big job ahead to do our executive search, to find ourselves a new executive director and administrative assistants to keep this organization moving. And the task force has made good progress. We were introduced to the association management companies, often referred to AMCs, something I had never heard of before, but we're learning. Carl has set us up with one that agreed to educate us on what they do and how they do it. I personally learned a lot, though the presentation was also loaded with subtle and overt sales talk. But anyway, I felt like I learned a lot at that meeting. And at this meeting, we learned about the capabilities of AMCs, which in a nutshell is all about handling the day-to-day administrative operation of organizations. Right? Some firms, AMCs, are not equipped to manage newly formed organizations or aren't interested in doing so. Some won't take organizations that are as small as we are. Others are happy to take us, just like all of us in the IT business. We have our preferred type of client that we like to work with. So do they. It's really not any different than how we select clients. But after that meeting, Carl was able to make some final edits to the request for proposals, which he has sent out now to 58 different AMCs. To date, we received a few not interested responses and a couple of proposals. So at our next meeting, we're going to review the responses and decide whether we think we have a sufficient number or if we need to tweak our process. But we're making good headway with our executive search. So we're pretty excited for what's coming next.
Very good. Thank you. And I just want to, assure people I'm not going anywhere. I just have a business to run. So we're grateful to be at a point where we can actually pay a little something to get some professional outsourced services, which is, what we do for a living. So we'll let other people do what they do for a living. I am going to go to the next poll, which is at the request of Amy. What additional topics would help you grow your professionalism? You think about like talking to the media or understanding change management within your own company and your clients. What other things can we help you with? So please put comments into that poll, and I appreciate that. Just a note, our membership, we need to find somebody who knows what they're doing to reorganize the way it looks. But basically, those of you who were paid members, please go to your portal and upgrade your membership to a company membership or to the new professional 125 membership. Basically, Kara's done a spectacular job with this. So it prorates the difference and it does all kinds of magic. And we would love to have you renew at the new rates. I will also note many of you have joined us in July and August. And so, heads up that this is coming. And if you want to move to the next level, you may. I will also say, I forgot to mention, and I got to put this in my notes for the next quarterly meeting. We also have some people who have had associate memberships. So let's say that you've got, 10 employees, you would join at the 375 level. You would get one vote. You can have one person designated to sit on committees or run for office. But then your other employees could register as associate members. They can view everything on the website. They can sit in on committees. They can do everything except vote in elections and hold office. So, that's a way that we can have lots of people involved and helping us and contributing to the mental energy that it takes to run the organization and the creativity, but they don't each have to pay a big price. So anyway, if you have any questions, send us an email and we'll be happy to help you. With that, I encourage people to consider continue putting things in the poll, but now we're open for Q&A and we will stay a little longer if we need to. What questions do you have of us?
I hope you have many questions because as I just put in the chat, my favorite part of any presentation, any webinar, any talk, anything is Q&A. I know a lot of presenters hate Q&A because they're worried they won't be prepared to give the answer. And I just love the conversation part of it. So, so please unmute or type into the chat to ask us your Q&A. This sort of concludes our meeting for today as far as content wise, but Carl and I and others are happy to hang around for as long as necessary to answer any questions that you have.
And I feel a little guilty of that we took up so much time. On the other hand, just a demonstration of how incredibly busy we are.
I do have more of a comment. I did the Dave Siebel's event last week. And I'd really like, I guess this is kind of a nag. I'd really like to see us have some kind of handout. I mean, even if when I go to events, you just send me the PDF and I take it to Kinko's because it never changed from Kinko's and get them printed up. That's not a problem. I mean, I'd rather do that than ship stuff back and forth. But just so for reference, one of the common questions I get is, I'm already a member. And then I go, well, did you pay? And they go, no, I didn't know I was supposed to pay. And there's no, I don't think we have anything on the go that I could say, this is why you member, like, and you know, the membership metrics. I think that would be helpful.
So Keith, thank you very much. I completely 100% agree. This is literally one of those things that it's just, I'm the bottleneck. And if people have ideas or drafts or whatever, I will take it. But I have just been too busy to actually generate the handouts so that you can just go to that resources page and download the PDF. But I will do so. I just have to have time.
Okay.
Hey, Keith, one of the things we're doing here at Channel Pro in Chicago is we have the
Ted, hey.
ethics statements that we have out on the table for people to pick up so they can get more information about what we're doing.
All right, you know, I'll work on what I think the metrics should look like, and maybe it'd be cool if we create have a booth, you know, document file on the landing site where those of us that host these, we can just download it and it can all be, you know, completely always edited and approved by the powers to be. And it would make us really easy to go to events, you know, even events we don't have a table at. I wouldn't mind printing an extra 50 or so and just bringing them along and handing to the hallway conversations.
That's a great idea.
Hey, I'm going to have to go pretty quick. I have another one at 10, but I'm going to be a moment or two late. Let me make just a quick comment and then ask a question. I love the idea of having an e-brochure that we can have accessible on the website that anybody can grab whenever they need it. I would like to see us include in there some of the benefits that we offer to our members, like the webinars, whether they're past or upcoming. I'd also like to see us talk about what professionalism means. Professionalism is such a big piece of why we exist. I think it would be very important to put in there what we mean when we talk about professionalism. Just some thoughts. The question I wanted to ask for those of you that are still here, does anybody have any questions or curiosity or comments about change management, about whether you feel like you understand it or you don't, where you think it would be valuable to have more insight or not? Anybody have any thoughts about that?
It's an unusually quiet group today.
I
Usually at
know.
these meetings, we get a lot of questions and, you know, we're here for like half an hour or more, just, you know, going through them and chatting. And so speak up, guys.
Yeah.
Well, Larry, I would say this, change is very hard for anybody and everybody. And those of us that are in this industry, I think we have to be way fluid or way more fluid because it's such a rapid change. And I think right now, what I'm kind of not in a true battle with, but really having to kind of walk quickly is AI. I mean, that just seems to be really front and center of everybody right now. And, a couple of my guys, all of a sudden I noticed some productivity is going a little bit faster in some of the things they're creating. And I'm seeing that now AI, and that's a big change. And I think it's a scary one as well. And I think that is causing in some environments, a little bit of a culture shock per se, or a scare change of what are we going to do in the near future?
Yeah, Lisa, you bring up a really good point. AI is, so I'm gonna make two comments. One of the things that I want to talk about during the change management webinar is how we can help clients better embrace efforts to keep them secure. It's indirectly related to AI, but that's one of the key points that have come up over the last few months. When it comes to AI, in my opinion, AI is not yet ripe. So we've got a bunch of people eating fruit that's not ready to be consumed. And I get AI shoved in my face probably on an average of 3 times a day. And my consistent response is the same. I'm not going to talk about AI right now. It's not ready for prime time. It's something that you might be able to benefit from. Maybe you won't, but the risk of trying to work with something that's not ready yet is too great for me. I have to, my world is sustainability. And AI does not contribute to sustainability at this point in time. We'll talk about it when it's ready. And I know there's a lot of people who don't like that, and I'm okay with that. I bought my first computer in 1973. For those of you that are not good at math, that was 50 years ago. And we spent over 200% of our gross sales to buy that computer, our annual gross sales. Think about that. I've lived on the leading edge for most of those 50 years, and I'm done. I will not continue to exist there. So while I appreciate what you're saying, I think it's very important for all of us in the IT industry to find a lasso, rope that son of a bitch, and tie it down for a little bit. It's just too wild.
Right.
Interesting. We have to debate offline.
Exactly. Or maybe debate online.
Okay, we've been using AI at JPL at Caltech for maybe 15 years. So I think that the general statement, I think some of the chats and some of the new integrations are not ready for prime time, but the computing idea of AI in manufacturing, in exploration, in science and research and discovery is pretty well established.
You will not get an argument from me, Keith. I couldn't agree with you more. I've seen it. I don't know if I would say I've seen it. I saw it given birth. I'm not sure if that's accurate, but I've seen it since its nascent stages, and I've watched it evolve and develop, and I've seen it where it can be very powerful. When people talk about AI today, let me back up. I hate these generalities. It feels to me like everybody that talks to me about AI today is not talking about the AI you're talking about. They're talking about the kind of BS AI that isn't ready for prime time. So you and I are on the same page. I just think what most of the people we're dealing with as MSPs aren't in the kind of sophisticated technology environment that you were in 15 years ago when this came into your industry.
Yeah, in fact, it was longer than that. And it was 2001, we used it as the modeling for the communication protocols between the Jet Propulsion Lab and the original Mars probe. And so that's the kind of everyone's opinion is different, not one's right or wrong. I kind of educate them on we're looking at fluff. We're looking at real AI with the chat GPT and all that's going on. It's just a different way of presenting it.
Right. The problem I have with that is that I have clients who have played with chat GPT and found answers to questions that they really were struggling with. And that just creates a sense of value that is false. Let me give you an example. One of my clients has some structural changes that they're going through, organizational changes that they're going through, that requires them to bring in a formal manager in their finance and accounting department. They've never had that before. They've had leads, but never an actual manager who's responsible for direct reports. They struggle to come up with a title. They used ChatGPT, came up with a title, and fell in love with it. And they're like, oh, this is the greatest thing. Well, it turns out that we were in a meeting with another client in the same industry, and they said, oh, that's the title I have for my head of accounting. Mm-hmm. And I said, see, all you need to do, what you need is out there. You don't need this gimmick. This is a gimmick. This is not something you need. You're just trying to make life easier on yourself. You're trying to be lazy. All you had to do is send an email out to your industry, to some of your colleagues, and say, what would you consider this position? But people have a misguided understanding of it. That's why I come at it from a negative perspective. I'm trying to stop them from being overly enthusiastic, and it's just my nature. You seem like a nice kind of guy, so your nature is to come at them in a much softer way.
The funny thing I use when I teach people this, just because I'm a sports fan and a huge football fan, they asked Chat GPT to list the 10 best running backs in the NFL. Number 2 was Elliott, who's getting released by the Cowboys. And the only reason I use that as an example is I said, the data set is old, right? You expected a current answer, and that skews it. And to people that are less technically educated, that maybe understand more, that they go, oh, well, how's he on the list? And where's this guy? And you're going, remember, the data set's old.
Yeah.
And it's influenced by prior queries.
Yeah. Well, here's my analogy, Keith. I hope you like this. It's like having someone who's mastered, I mean mastered, the various highest possible level of expertise, a flying application, a pilot flying application. Mm-hmm. And you expect them to be able to get in a plane and fly it.
Right.
Doesn't work that way. It just doesn't work that way. Anyway, guys, I got to go. I'm late for a meeting. I'd love to talk to you more about this, Keith, and everyone else. Thank you all for your participation and contributions. We love it.
Perfect.